In metabolic cases, such as the Dutch hunger winter or the Swedish famine, where there's been profound starvation in a generation, that somehow has changed the metabolic processes in subsequent generations. And that seems to be an epigenetic mechanism.
We spend our lives worrying about the sky falling, pandemics, superstorms, the slow burn of climate change. But while we were looking up, something else was happening right at our feet. In 2023, a massive data breach exposed a secret hiding on a quiet, unsuspecting island. Blueprints for a genetically engineered mouse capable of rewriting the rules of nature.
Lyme disease is on the rise and can now be found in all 50 states. That report comes from researchers based in New Jersey. It also reports Lyme disease has exploded in states like California and...
For months, the lab doors stayed shut. But when the leak reached Joe Rogan, the conspiracy went viral. The world finally woke up, but perhaps too late. We now have to ask the terrifying question: did the experiment stay in the lab, or has our world already changed without us even knowing? The leak that raised questions. For a long time, most of us simply trusted what we heard about science. We looked at the headlines, watched the news, and believed every major experiment came with a full explanation. It felt straightforward, but the truth is, a lot of research happens silently, long before the public ever hears a word about it. Meetings take place, plans are discussed, and decisions are made with almost no attention from the outside world. And then, once in a while, a small detail slips out. Not enough to explain anything, just enough to make you wonder what's really unfolding behind those closed doors. In 2023, a rumor started circulating online that made people stop and pay attention. Someone claimed they had access to files from a research lab in Massachusetts, files that were never meant for anyone outside the lab. According to the rumor, a hacker had broken into a university system and uncovered a folder packed with emails, draft proposals, planning notes, field logs, and records from internal work sessions. Now, they claim the person who shared the information never released the full documents. They only dropped small hints, tiny pieces of the puzzle that were enough to spark curiosity and unease. Just clues, but powerful ones. People began to ask themselves, had a science project left the lab and entered the real world? The anonymous hints suggested something bigger than anyone had imagined. A study that reached beyond controlled experiments into the wild, potentially shaping the life of an entire species. No one could say for certain if it was real or just speculation. But the mystery captured attention, and before long, people began to wonder, how much science is happening right now, behind closed doors, without us even knowing? To understand what people were reacting to, you have to look at the files themselves. They reportedly surfaced online briefly, and were traced back to a research institute in Massachusetts. And according to those who saw them, the files raised questions nobody outside the lab had ever imagined asking. Questions that touched on science, secrecy, and just how far humans should go when it comes to reshaping nature. At first, the documents looked harmless. There were draft proposals, internal emails, and scattered field notes, the kind of everyday paperwork that usually stays buried in old archives. Nothing alarming, but the deeper people looked, the more one phrase kept appearing. It showed up in notes, in emails, and even in planning summaries. It reveals plans to release genetically engineered mice into the environment. Not just any mice, white-footed mice. Not in testing cages, not in closed labs, but out in actual landscapes. The files reportedly outlined a staged release. The idea was to release thousands of mice in cycles, each new batch building on the last. The goal was simple but striking: to change how Lyme disease spreads by altering the very animals that carry it. What made it even more surprising was the timing. Many of the drafts dated back to 2020 and 2021, right in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. While the world was focused on a global crisis, these plans were silently being shaped behind closed doors. But here are the questions that really made people sit up. If these mice were actually going to be released, what could happen next? How might it affect humans, wildlife, and the environment? And most importantly, who even gets to decide when a whole community becomes part of an experiment like this? These are the questions that make the story feel much bigger than just a set of rumored leaked files. But here's where the rumors start to meet reality. The leaked documents have never been officially verified. Still, the project they describe, releasing engineered mice to fight Lyme disease, is real. For years, researchers in Massachusetts, including teams connected to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Media Lab, have openly discussed a project exactly like this. The project is called Mice Against Ticks, and it has been debated in scientific circles for years. So, whether the leak was authentic or not, it highlighted something real and made people wonder if a much larger story was already silently unfolding. This is why Joe Rogan's comment added fuel to the fire. On his show, he casually mentioned that something had been released in the United States without people knowing. He didn't give details, but the timing matched the online chatter perfectly. Now, if you're familiar with Rogan's show, you'll know he often brings up ideas that sound strange at first, only to become serious discussions in the mainstream later. So when he hinted at a leak, listeners leaned in. Was he talking about the Massachusetts project, confirming the rumors? Or was it just another comment meant to get people talking? Before long, the story was everywhere online. People debated whether the leaked files were really connected to an actual ecological experiment. Some argued it proved that scientists were taking big risks. Others thought it was just a misunderstood public health project. And many kept asking the same question: if this is true, why didn't anyone tell us? The more people dug in, the more it looked like the project had been silently moving forward, far from public attention. What makes the claim so fascinating is that the documents reportedly did not read like a conspiracy theory. They are said to look like ordinary planning notes, dry, technical, and full of jargon, but unsettling because they presented things as if they were completely normal. They were not trying to convince anyone, they were just laying out the steps. Of course, all of this comes from rumors and speculation. Nobody has confirmed the files publicly. Still, the story suggested something remarkable. A project that could be a breakthrough, but was crafted to stay largely invisible to the public. And to understand why this plan even existed, we need to look at the ecological target, the island where the project was meant to take place. Why this island? What made it the right spot for genetically altered mice? And what would it mean for the people living there? The island and its history. When the leaked files talked about a release plan, one name kept coming up: Nantucket, a small island off the coast of Massachusetts with its calm beaches, historic wooden houses, and the kind of charm you see in travel magazines or summer vacation photos. Most Americans recognize the name, even if they've never been there. It is the kind of place people picture when they think of a peaceful summer. But behind that postcard-perfect picture, Nantucket has been dealing with something serious for years: Lyme disease. The ticks on the island carry bacteria that can make people very sick, and nearly every family knows someone who has been affected. Parents check their children after outdoor play. Hikers stick to safe trails. Doctors see case after case each summer. And for the locals who live on this island, Lyme disease is not a small issue. In fact, it is now part of everyday life. And that is what made the reported leaked files so unsettling. They did not point to some random inhibited test site. They pointed to a real community, a place people know, a place where the idea of releasing genetically engineered mice suddenly felt personal. According to the files, this was why scientists reportedly chose Nantucket. If they could control Lyme disease here, they believed it could be a model for the rest of the country. Now, here's how it works. Tick feed on white-footed mice, and this is how they pick up the bacteria that cause Lyme disease. Once a tick is infected, it can pass the bacteria to humans. So the idea was simple: change the mice so they cannot carry the bacteria. If the mice do not have it, the ticks cannot get it. And if the ticks cannot get it, people stay safer. The plan in the leaked documents was laid out step by step. First, release a small group of engineered mice in carefully controlled areas. Watch how they behave. Then, gradually, release more mice across larger parts of the island. Each new generation would carry the genetic change, slowly spreading through the population. On paper, it almost looked like a neat solution to a messy problem. Stop Lyme disease by changing the animals that start the chain. But here's the thing. Despite all this promise, the project made people uneasy. Yes, it was meant to protect the island, but much of it seemed to be happening out of public sight. According to the files, only a handful of residents were aware of what was planned. The so-called consultations were small and vague, and the full scale, thousands of mice over multiple cycles, wasn't really explained. This secrecy made the project feel bigger and riskier than anyone wanted to admit. And that's exactly why it unsettled so many people. Also, inside the scientific community, there are claims that the debates were just as intense. Some researchers believed this was the future, a chance to prove that gene editing could solve real health problems, while critics were worried. What if the mice reacted differently in the wild? What if the genetic changes spread farther than expected? Of course, people were worried. They kept asking questions, and they had every reason to. But even with all that concern, the files gave this strange sense that the project just kept going. A lot of the planning happened during the COVID period, when the whole world was in emergency mode. Scientists were working fast on many things, and health projects were pushed ahead more quickly than usual. So while locals were trying to understand what this meant for their island, the work in the documents still seemed to move forward, as if the pressure of the moment mattered more than slowing down and talking things through. The documents reportedly spelled out everything. Small trials first, then larger releases outside. Scientists would measure how the ticks changed, how the mice survived, and how predators reacted to this new population. The final goal was a full release across Nantucket. The island would become a living test site, carrying the first real attempt at rewriting nature to stop a disease. And it did not stop there. The files reportedly hinted that the idea could spread beyond Nantucket, other islands, maybe even parts of the mainland, anywhere Lyme disease was a problem. If the method worked, it could reshape ecosystems far beyond this one island. For the people who live there, this was massive. Of course, they wanted a solution to Lyme disease, but almost no one imagined the solution would involve changing the genetics of a wild species. According to the files, scientists hoped the community would accept the idea if it was presented as a simple health project. But the truth was bigger, more complicated, and far more secret than people expected. This was not just a plan to fight disease. It was a plan to change a species in a way the United States had never tried before. And to understand how that could even be possible, we need to look at the science behind the mice, the gene editing tools that made all of this real. Because the leaked files reportedly did not stop at mentioning the island. They went deeper, breaking down the method, the process, and the genetic changes meant to reshape an entire species. The science of remaking a species. The leaked files reportedly ended with a hint that something deeper was happening behind the scenes. They did not just mention the island or the release plan. They pointed toward the science that made the whole idea possible. And this was the part that caught everyone's attention, because it showed how far researchers were willing to go to stop Lyme disease. It wasn't just about studying mice, it was about rebuilding them from the inside. This idea alone made the story feel bigger than anyone had first imagined. To pull this off, scientists needed a tool that could change the mice in a clean and controlled way. The reports said they used a method that worked like tiny scissors, cutting and adjusting the DNA inside the animals. It sounds technical, but the goal was simple. They wanted to add a small piece of protection to the mice so these animals could not carry the Lyme bacteria anymore. In other words, they wanted to give the mice something like a built-in shield. And if the mice had this shield, the ticks feeding on them would never pick up the bacteria, and the chain of infection would weaken bit by bit. But changing a mouse in a lab is nothing compared to changing a mouse in the wild. And this is what got researchers worried. Mice raised indoors often struggle outside. They do not move the same. They do not hide the same, nor do they survive the same way. The files suggested long conversations about this problem. Some scientists believed the animals needed time to adjust to special outdoor areas before going into the real environment. Others felt the genetic change would help them survive anyway. It was a tug-of-war between caution and confidence, and both sides believed they were doing what was best for the project. There were also deeper questions that made even scientists nervous. If the engineered mice met wild mice, they would reproduce, and those babies would carry the new trait. Then their babies would carry it. Slowly, the engineered trait would spread on its own. Supporters said this was the whole point. Critics said this was the danger, because once it started spreading, no one could easily stop it. The files showed worry about how far the trait could travel, how long it would last, and what might happen if something unexpected appeared years later. All of this was made even more complicated by pressure from different directions. Funding deadlines, community meetings, internal goals. Everyone wanted progress, but progress meant moving fast. Some scientists pushed for more tests. Others pushed for release. Emails from the files painted a picture of a team trying to balance the excitement of a breakthrough with the fear of making the wrong move. Behind the clean science were real people, arguing, guessing, and hoping their choices would not cause problems later. And this led to the biggest question of all. How far do you think humans should go when rewriting nature to protect themselves? Of course, if you think about it, it sounds simple to change species, but the truth is, once those animals are out in the wild, there's no turning back. The files showed that even inside the labs, scientists could feel the weight of their decision. They knew they were about to step into an uncharted territory, something the United States had never tried before. At this point, Nantucket had become more than just an island. It has become a test of what happens when science steps into the wild. These were not just engineered mice. They were a sign of a future where diseases could be stopped, not with medicine, but by altering the animals that carry them. However, fast forward to 2025, and the project was no longer just notes in a lab or rumors in leaked files. The project, called Mice Against Ticks, had moved from rumors and theories to being tested in controlled areas, with scientists now watching closely to see how the changes would ripple through the ecosystem. But here's the question that refuses to go away. Could rewriting nature actually beat Lyme disease? Or was this experiment about to spiral completely out of control? The project in motion. Today, the Mice and Tick project is no longer a secret. Even though a leaked file in 2023 gave us just a hint of what scientists were planning, the project has silently continued to move forward. What started as a bold idea on Nantucket, suggested in a few vague notes online, has grown into one of the most closely watched ecological experiments in the United States. In labs across Massachusetts, scientists have been carefully breeding generations of white-footed mice. These are not ordinary mice. They carry special genes designed to make them resistant to Lyme disease. The work has taken years because researchers needed to make sure the genes survive from one generation to the next. They watched how the mice lived, how they reproduced, and how the changes affected them. Every little success brought them one step closer to the day the mice might leave the lab and live in a controlled outdoor space. From the very beginning, the scientists knew this project would make people nervous. Lyme disease is serious, but changing the genes of an animal is something permanent. That is why the project included public meetings on Nantucket and nearby Martha's Vineyard. Residents were invited to hear updates, ask questions, and voice their concerns. Some locals were excited, tired of the constant threat of Lyme disease. Others were worried. Could changing a species hurt the ecosystem? Could it go wrong in ways we cannot predict? The debates were heated and kept the project in the spotlight, making sure no one acted in secret. Even now, the mice have not been released across the island. Instead, they live in large outdoor enclosures that mimic real conditions. They face predators, find food, and experience the changing seasons, all under careful observation. Scientists need to know that the mice can survive and reproduce safely before anyone lets them roam free. These trials are a crucial step because the fate of the ecosystem could depend on the outcome. Funding and oversight have also slowed things down, but for good reason. Scientific institutions provide grants to support the work, while government agencies review every plan and require extensive data before any release. This means that no decision is rushed, and safety comes first. It also gives the project credibility. People can see that the scientists are being cautious, not reckless. Meanwhile, the broader scientific community watches closely. Experts discuss the project at conferences and in scientific journals. If the experiment works, it could set an example for using genetics to fight disease in other animals and ecosystems. Nantucket is no longer just a small island experiment. It is now a symbol of what science might attempt in the future, and people all over the world are paying attention. The project is still very controversial. Supporters see hope. They imagine a future where Lyme disease can be controlled, where children and adults can enjoy the outdoors without fear of ticks. Critics see danger. They worry about a permanent change to the environment, one that cannot be undone if something goes wrong. This tension has always been part of the story, and it continues today. However, the mice remain in carefully monitored conditions. Scientists watch, record, and adjust, while the residents of Nantucket wait and wonder what comes next. Every trial, every test, brings the project closer to the moment when engineered animals could finally step into the wild. But despite the progress, the worries that started the project have not gone away. Scientists, ethicists, and locals alike keep asking the same question. What happens when these genetically altered mice are released into the wild? The risks. One major challenge is that nature doesn't always follow the rules humans make. Yes, the scientists designed the mice so their babies would carry genes that stop Lyme disease, but by now we should know genes are unpredictable. Some researchers wondered if the disease-blocking genes might weaken over time, while others worried the genes could spread too quickly, changing the mouse population in ways no one expected. Predators make the situation even more complicated. Now, Nantucket has owls, hawks, snakes, and other animals that eat mice. If too many engineered mice are eaten, it could change how these predators hunt, how many babies they have, or even where they decide to live. The mice themselves are safe to eat, but in nature, one small change can create effects that ripple through the whole ecosystem. There's also the issue of permanence. Once these genes are released into the mice, there's no turning back. Unlike a spilled chemical or a broken machine, the change would pass on to every future generation of mice. Some scientists worry that unexpected problems could appear years from now, while others argue that making a lasting change might be the only way to really fight Lyme disease. It didn't end there. Hybridization is another concern. These engineered mice don't live alone. If they mate with wild mice, the new genes could spread beyond Nantucket. Supporters see it as a bigger shield against Lyme disease, but critics worry the genes could travel where they are not wanted or expected. Then there's evolution. Ticks are resilient, and bacteria are clever. Could Lyme disease find a way around the mice's defenses? Could ticks start feeding on other animals and find new ways to spread the infection? These are the kinds of questions scientists cannot ignore. Humans are part of the equation too. Mice can affect farms, gardens, and even homes. If the engineered mice act differently than expected, it could change how people live or manage their property. The mice are not dangerous, but even small changes in their behavior can ripple through daily life. However, supporters say the mice will not harm humans directly. The antibodies inside them are naturally occurring and only strengthened. These are ordinary animals with a special defense against disease, not monsters. But the unknowns still spark debate, and scientists continue to discuss the risks and possibilities. Regulations are strict for a reason. Every plan has to pass careful reviews. Scientists have to show how the mice survive, how they reproduce, and how they interact with the environment. They also need to prove that local people understand and accept any risks. It takes time, but this process helps prevent mistakes and builds trust. Then there's the ethics side of things. Who decides if a whole community becomes part of a science experiment? In Nantucket, residents are asked, but what if the genes spread beyond the island? Then people who never had a say could be affected. That's the question that keeps this debate alive. Meanwhile, the world is watching. Similar experiments are happening elsewhere. Malaria-resistant mosquitoes in Africa, programs controlling invasive species in Australia. Nantucket isn't just about Lyme disease anymore. It's a test case, a glimpse of how far humans might go when intervening in nature. These debates matter. They influence how fast the project moves, how much funding it gets, and how much trust the public has in the scientists. Supporters argue that stopping Lyme disease is worth it. Critics warn that unexpected consequences could be serious and impossible to predict. If humans can change mice on Nantucket, what does that mean for the future of our ecosystem? What this means for the future of science? The story of the engineered mice on Nantucket is bigger than just one island or one disease. It gives us a glimpse into a future where science doesn't wait for nature to adapt, but rewrites the rules itself. For centuries, humans have fought disease with medicine, vaccines, and technology. But here, the battlefield is different. Scientists aren't just treating people, they're changing the environment, altering the very creatures that carry illness. Nantucket isn't alone. Around the world, similar projects are silently unfolding. In Africa, researchers are experimenting with mosquitoes engineered to resist malaria. Imagine villages where children can play without fear of a single deadly bite. In Australia, scientists have tested genetic strategies to control cane toads, giving rivers and wetlands a chance to recover. In Hawaii, conservationists are exploring ways to make birds resistant to avian malaria, protecting species that might otherwise disappear. These projects hint at a new era. Ecosystems are no longer left to chance. They are being deliberately reshaped to protect human health and preserve biodiversity. This is science on a scale that feels almost unimaginable. And it's happening where people live, not just in hidden labs, but in forests, rivers, and islands across the world. Yet, these possibilities carry weight. Once a species is altered and released, there's no undo button. The genes persist, they spread, and the environment itself becomes a living experiment. Supporters see hope, a chance to finally outpace diseases that have plagued humanity for centuries. Critics see risk, a reminder that even small interventions can ripple through ecosystems in ways we might not notice until it's too late. And the questions don't stop there. If Lyme disease can be reduced by changing mice, what's next? Could crops be engineered to survive droughts and feed millions? Could coral reefs be strengthened to withstand warming oceans? Could predators be redesigned to control invasive species? Each idea might sound like science fiction, but scientists are seriously discussing them in research circles. The mice on Nantucket are more than an experiment. They're a symbol of what's coming, a future where the boundaries between science and nature blur. Evolution is no longer the only force shaping life. Human decisions are rewriting ecosystems. For some, it's an exciting vision of progress. For others, it's a stark warning about how little control we might really have once these changes begin to spread. As this project moves forward, questions remain. What will happen when the first generation of engineered mice meets the wild? How will predators, ticks, and entire ecosystems respond? And maybe the most unsettling question of all, the one that should stay with as this video ends. If something like this can be released into the world without most of us knowing, how many other experiments are already silently shaping the future of our planet without our knowledge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. If you enjoyed this video, click on the next video on your screen.